You think you know what the Pilgrims looked like? Think again. For centuries, our Thanksgiving imagery has been dominated by pointy hats, big buckles, and a look that's, well, completely made up. In TSBDO, we are tearing down those persistent myths to reveal the surprising truth about early Plymouth fashion. Prepare to have your historical fashion sense completely rewired. Every November, we see them. Illustrations of stern-looking men in black, wearing tall, cone-shaped hats with a shiny buckle right in the middle. Women in dark dresses with stark white aprons and collars. It's the standard image of the Pilgrims, plastered on everything from school worksheets to holiday decorations. But what if I told you that this entire look is a historical fabrication? These iconic visuals are almost entirely fictional, a product of centuries of artistic license and commercial branding, not historical fact. So, get ready to unlearn everything you thought you knew about Pilgrim fashion as we strip away the myths and discover what these early settlers actually wore. Let's start by unbuckling the truth. The idea of Pilgrims decorating their hats, shoes, and belts with large, shiny buckles is one of the most persistent myths. To understand why this is wrong, we need to look at what people in 17th century England and Europe were actually wearing. Buckles did exist, but they were luxury items. They were expensive, often made of silver, and certainly not something you'd find on the everyday clothing of a group of religious separatists seeking a simpler life. For most people, clothing was fastened with ribbons, laces, hooks, and eyes. If buckles were used at all, they were small, functional, and typically found on things like sword belts or maybe the straps of sturdy shoes, not as big, flashy decorations on a hat. The Pilgrims, as part of the broader Puritan movement, actively rejected what they saw as the excessive and vain fashions of the English court. Their beliefs emphasized simplicity, modesty, and practicality. Their clothing reflected these values. They weren't trying to make a fashion statement. They were trying to survive in a new and harsh environment. The image of a giant, gleaming buckle on a hat is the exact opposite of their ethos. It would have been considered gaudy, wasteful, and worldly. So where did we get this idea? It came much, much later. We'll get to that in a bit, but first, let's talk about those hats. Now, let us take our hats off to historical accuracy and talk about that famous Pilgrim hat. That tall, cone-shaped hat with a buckle, often called a capitaine, is pure fiction. There is absolutely zero historical evidence that Pilgrims wore hats like this. In fact, in the 17th century, tall, pointed hats were more commonly associated with stage characters, clowns, or even depictions of witches. It wasn't a respectable form of head. So, what did Pilgrim men actually wear on their heads? For the most part, they wore practical, broad-brimmed felt hats. These were usually black or brown, and made of wool or beaver felt. The wide brim was functional. It kept the sun and rain off their faces while they worked. They also wore simple knit caps, much like a modern beanie, especially in colder weather. These were comfortable, warm, and easy to make. Women and girls, on the other hand, almost always wore a linen coif, which was a close-fitting cap that covered their hair. When they went outside, they might wear a felt hat over their coif. The key takeaway here is that their headwear was practical and simple, not the cartoonish steeple hat we see in Thanksgiving decorations. The buckled hat is a complete invention. So, if the buckles and hats are wrong, where did these images come from? The answer lies not in the 17th century, but in the 19th. The modern image of the Pilgrim was born during the Victorian era, a time of intense romanticism and a newfound fascination with America's colonial past. Artists and illustrators in the 1800s began creating paintings and drawings of the first Thanksgiving. But they weren't historians. They were artists trying to tell a story. They took inspiration from various 17th century styles, mashed them together, and added their own dramatic flair. The buckle was an easy visual shorthand for old-fashioned. The tall hat looked distinct and severe, fitting the Victorian idea of the somber, deeply religious Puritan. These romanticized images were then picked up and amplified by commercial interests. As Thanksgiving became a national holiday, companies needed a recognizable symbol to market their products. The buckled hat Pilgrim was perfect. It was simple, easy to draw, and instantly recognizable. Through decades of advertising, greeting cards, and school plays, this inaccurate image was repeated so many times that it became cemented in our collective consciousness as historical fact. We see it so often that we just assume it's true. It's a classic example of how repetition can create a truth, even when it has no basis in reality. The Pilgrim we know is less a historical figure and more of a 19th century brand logo. So, what did the Pilgrims actually look like? Well, for one, they didn't just wear black. While black was a common color, especially for their best Sunday clothes, their everyday garments came in a variety of earth tones. They wore clothing made from linen and wool in colors like brown, gray, dark green, and russetto, reddish. Their clothes were dyed with natural materials from plants and minerals, so vibrant, bright colors were rare and expensive. A typical man might wear a linen shirt, a doublet, which is a sort of fitted jacket breeches that came down to the knee, stockings, and simple leather shoes. Women wore a linen shift as an undergarment, a bodice and skirt, or a full gown, an apron to protect their clothes, and always that linen coif on their head. Their clothing was layered, practical, and designed for a life of hard work, not for a fashion parade. It was far more colorful and varied than the drab, uniform-like black outfits we often imagine. It's important to remember that these were real people, not cartoon characters. They were farmers, weavers, and craftsmen. They faced incredible hardship, and their clothing reflected the practical realities of their lives. By stripping away the fictional buckles and hats, we get a much richer and more human picture of who they were. Understanding their true appearance helps us connect with them as people, not as mythical figures from a holiday story. Challenging these ingrained images is about more than just being a historical stickler. It's about practicing critical thinking. It encourages us to ask questions about the information we're given, especially when it comes to history. Who created this image? Why? What purpose did it serve? When we start questioning the myth of the pilgrim costume, we can start questioning other historical truths that might also be based more on tradition and myth than on fact. It pushes us to dig deeper and seek out a more authentic understanding of the past. So, the next time you see a drawing of a pilgrim with a big buckle on his hat, you'll know the real story. You'll know that the reality was far more complex and, frankly, more interesting. History is full of these kinds of myths, and debunking them is part of the fun of learning. What other historical ideas have we taken for granted? Let's keep asking questions and exploring the real stories behind the symbols. Thanks for watching. If you found this dive into a historical fashion interesting, hit that like button and subscribe for more myth-busting content. Let me know in the comments what other historical myths you'd like to see us tackle next. See you in the next video.